let's hear from our physicians that are with us. I think we really want to hear from you three. And I think, first of all, if you could interact with the question of what conscience protection means to you, and maybe just take turns addressing that. Dr. Dobson, would you like to go first? And let's break open this conversation.
Yeah, sure. So for me to practice fully, then I do need conscious protection, because right now, even right before my college is considering making it so that you have to, when there's someone is seriously ill, that it have to be mentioning medical assisted dying, a lethal injection versus therapy, and I can't practice in that context. I can't practice even. I retired from family practice in the end of May 2018. I had a case, a 6-year-old in his 60s, a gentleman with a respiratory illness, who kept demanding medical assistance and dying, and I couldn't provide it to him, but I also didn't have a way out. So I gave him palliative care, but it was such a mentally stressful, because every day he asked for it, and he said, "Why don't you shoot me?" And I didn't have a way out of it, and I just found it so traumatic. Although he had a good death, I just felt I think I don't want to practice in this context. I just can't. And in my family practice, there was nobody who was like-minded. And I didn't want to give my patients all over who were asking for it to them, because I wanted to address their underlying causes. Because often when I address their underlying cause for their suicide wish, then I can stop the request, or at least, make it so that they no longer want to be killed. That happened in several cases, but this one case was so traumatic to me that I stopped practicing. Yeah.
Wow. Dr. Gugliotta, would you like to share next?
Yes, I agree with Dr. Dobson. I think the moral distress that's always potentially there when you're dealing with a dying patient, and the possibility of being asked for aid and how you deal with that. So I think that we don't really have an adequate way to deal with that and still maintain our moral integrity. And I guess we've worked very hard over the last 3, 4, 5 years to try to have a balance so that the obligation that's currently there now will not force us to breach our moral integrity. So to me, it means practicing with your moral integrity intact, practicing without the threat of moral distress upon you.
Thank you. Dr. Nunes? You just need to unmute, sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, as I think about what's coming in the next few weeks, it really gives me a lot of anxiety about dealing with my patients. Right now, in the middle of a pandemic, normally family physicians, we deal with a lot of mental illness. There just aren't the psychiatrists in the area to deal with it. And so during the last year, the increase in mental illness has been like staggering. I would say almost every other phone call, every other visit is about mental illness. I've had people who are substance abusers who have been well for years and are back in trouble. So to be dealing with this during this time and having people come in who are desperate, who are in despair, and to be faced with being asked to take a life, to be involved in a decision and being complicit in ending a life is just overwhelming. I plan to have those conversations, and I plan to, meaning talk to people and see what are the real issues. But there's going to be a lot of pressure. I will not refer, but in these sort of situations, there's going to be pressure from other family members. And it's just, I want to be able to have a conversation with people, give them information, and not fear for what's coming down the next day in terms of repercussions. And if need be, you know, I'll be reprimanded or taken to court. I don't know, but I mean, it's hard enough dealing with what's going on now, much less having this anxiety about, will this conversation with this very depressed person lead to this, and what will it mean?
Thank you. I guess my follow-up, and I'm hearing some hints of this in what you're saying. How does this impact the way that you interact with your patients in your practice? And I know Dr. Dobson has retired, but how did that impact not just the patient who asked for MAID, but other patients who ended up having a terminal diagnosis or a chronic diagnosis? Why don't we start again with you, Dr. Nunes?
I haven't actually had to deal with a chronic illness or for my terminally ill patients. We have a palliative care team that I refer to, and even the physician there doesn't do MAID. It has to be a referral sent to Hamilton. But so far, I've been rather fortunate. But what I'm concerned about is this extreme expansion. The doors are going to be wide open now for those who are chronically ill, for those who are mentally, and you know, as a physician, you can only handle so much in terms of, a lot of these are existential issues, and you know, they don't have family support, they don't have financial things, so you can't supply the answers, and yet you want to give them hope, you want them to choose life. So what are you going to offer? And that's the pressure that I'm going to be facing.
Thank you. Let's go to Dr. Gugliotta next. And the follow-up here would be the same question, because I know we've had lots of conversations over the years about not just how it impacts patient care, but how it impacts your relationship with the registrar and the CPSO itself. So if you want to speak to that as well, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've tried to encourage the college, and currently the MAID policy is under review, a routine 5-year review. We're trying to encourage the college to give a little bit and to allow for multiple access of patients for assessment and delivery of MAID, one of which would not obligate physicians to make arrangements. Those are the current terms, and make arrangements. They've lightened things from effective referral to make arrangements, which really is the same. One of the questions in the chat says, what are some of the common reasons for a request? And I think, and also, how will C7 change things? And if I may just give you a story, I think I can answer those questions with a story. After 33 years of family practice, I stopped about 8 months ago. One of the reasons was because of MAID, but not the main reason. I'll tell you about Jim. Jim is a married 60-year-old man with lifelong chronic pain and multiple complex medical problems. His death is not reasonably foreseeable. He asked me for MAID about 3 years ago. He didn't qualify then. He will qualify very shortly. He's a Christian man, but not in a community of believers. He also has significant anxiety and a personality disorder. And that's not easily treated with medications or psychotherapy. I would call his personality disorder something called borderline or chronic unstable personality. And that's probably present in about 1 in 100 patients. These patients generally have lots of persistent suicidal ideation. They don't have this strong intention that a severely depressed person would have. But often these suicidal attempts are really just a cry for help. And most commonly, they suicide by accident. So under the new MAID criteria, Jim would qualify for MAID. And my college says that I have to make arrangements. I firstly have to tell him that I'm a conscientious objector, which basically cuts off much of the communication which I can have with him to try to explore things. It may not completely cut it off, but it definitely is a challenge for further communication. And I have to make arrangements. In other words, I have to send him to somebody who can assess and possibly deliver MAID. Well, of course, for me, this is participation. I can't do that. And it's not, to me, it's also morally wrong in the eyes of God. But I think this is a good example of how things change now, both because he's got chronic disability and because he has psychiatric condition as not his soul, but as a significant diagnosis. So you can see how the landscape is going to completely change with C7. And many doctors, I believe, outside of any religious affiliation, will now have trouble with this. And I don't think as a profession we completely understand this, but I think very shortly we will. So that's just an example of what kind of person might ask for MAID and the dilemma that doctors of conscience will be faced with.
Thank you, Dr. Gugliotta. Dr. Dobson, do you have any follow-up comments?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we all, I don't know, I think all as Christians, we know lots of friends and family members that have mental illness and that will be, you know, especially as Dr. Gugliotta said, those with like personality disorders, because right now the amendment has said irremedial. Well, what does that mean? Irremedial. It means that you can't do anything further for the mentally ill, but it's in their minds, not just by a doctor saying it. So there's a lots of patients when they're suicidal, they don't have any hope. They think it's hopeless. So even think of our friends and family members who will be on the chopping block with us instead of being given, you know, admission to a psych ward, or if they really need it, if they're suicidal, being talked down, they'll be given access to medical assistance in dying, the lethal injection, and will be asked to participate in their death, you know. So I think everybody could see how it's going to impact so many people we know, so many vulnerable people. And in order to practice medicine and nursing and pharmacy, they're all implicated, right? As Christians, unless we want to be no longer be participating in the medical system, we need conscience protection.
I would love for one or all three of you to explain about referral, because I think a lot of people would be completely sympathetic and understand immediately why some physicians would not want to participate actively in MAID. I think sometimes the general public struggles to understand the problem with referral, and I think it would be helpful for if somebody wanted to take that on.
Well, I know when you use the word referral, it sounds like, oh, so what? You're just filling out a paperwork. Who cares, right? But let's say someone came to you and said, Karen, you know what? I want my wife to be killed, right? Do you know a good person that I could access to get that done? And you said, oh yeah, I know someone who could do it for you. Okay, so would you be morally implicated in that, to helping me kill my husband, let's say? I mean, directly, right? Because you will be setting up the hitman for me, right? So just in the same way, we're going to be taking our patient who's asking to be killed. We're going to be sending them to a hitman to get their lethal injection. That's direct participation in evil, direct cooperation with evil.
So everyone take note of that, because that was a very good response. I will be sharing that when I talk to people. Thank you. Yeah, that's very clear. What are we actually looking for in protection legislation then? Like, what is the best outcome that would help doctors feel protected? Dr. Gugliotta, would you like to answer that?
Yes, I think that as much as we don't want to use it as an example, we have to use it. And that is in the case of abortion. I have not had to refer. There's a means by which someone can access that directly. And in fact, in Ontario right now, there's a means by which someone can access MAID directly. It's as easy as calling me. They can just call the number and they can carry on. But what we're seeing is some ideology, some very strong ideology from the regulators, which feel that I'm abrogating my responsibility by not being involved. And so it's a bit of an ideological war. And I think that we're so close and yet not there. So we're hoping that, and it's unfortunate, as David said, that we have to legislate conscience. I mean, it's a mind blower, but we're left to that. We're left to either modifying the policy and the regulators of the college, or having legislation which protects conscience. So I think that's what we're left with at the moment.
Thank you. And there is a question in the chat, which is a very good one. What does the pressure to offer MAID look like? Are there peers or administrators providing pressure? I think that's something we're all really interested to know, what it's actually like to be a Christian doctor in this current climate on this.
Well, I've got friends who are like in my study group, right? And I showed them a little bit of the clip from Fatal Flaws. Did anybody see that? That was it's a very good Fatal Flaws. It's about, I think, the Netherlands experience. It's excellent on euthanasia. And I showed them a little clip of it. And then none of them, some of them are Christian in name, but not in practice. And all of them could sympathize with me, but they all could lethally inject their patient, you know? But they said, well, if it ever came to psych patients, they couldn't. So they were sympathetic, but they thought I should be part of the process anyway. It's just a referral. Why don't you just do it? And the same when I was in family practice, my head was sympathetic, but not willing to back me at all. And so, yeah. Yeah, but you know what? Even more than patients, and even more than my colleagues, it's the patients and their families. I found was overwhelming push for it. Yeah, I found that too hard because I want to care for them, and they didn't want my help. You know.
I would love to hear a response to that question too from Dr. Nunes about, just to repeat the question, what does the pressure to offer MAID look like for you? What's the pressure from administrators and your peers look like? Sorry, you have to unmute.
I've been in a group practice for quite a while. There's 10 physicians, and for me, there's varied thinking about this, but certainly no pressure from administrators or from peers. Some peers agree, some disagree. I think from peers, it's like, if you don't want to do it, I don't want to do your dirty work kind of thing. So this idea of referral is kind of looked down upon that way as extra work for other physicians. But to me, the pressure, most of my time is in with patients, and that's the part where the pressure comes in. People who don't see any hope within their problems, people who don't have access to help. That's where the pressure comes to, you know, to side with them, to give them a relief in this way, and that's where I see the problem coming.
Thank you. There's a really great question in the chat that I want to share. Are there particular sub-disciplines or disciplines in medicine, particular types of practice that are under greater pressure than others under the current legislation? And will that change with C7? I think I'm going to ask you to answer that, Dr. Gugliotta, because I know you helped us a little bit with some research on this topic.
Yes, absolutely. The main disciplines remain primary care, that's family practice, palliative care, and very soon, in 2 years, psychiatry. Specialists, for the most part, aren't faced with this because there's always someone to send them back to. But primary care is where the buck stops, and those other disciplines, because they have unique relationships with the patients. The second question about abuse of MAID, absolutely. Patients know that autonomy is very, very, I was going to say worshipped. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But autonomy is held high. It's above all the other values. And so patients are smart and they know their rights. And so I think that MAID sometimes is used as a means to get things. In other words, if someone's disabled, they say, well, if I don't get this service, then I have to consider MAID. So it's not necessarily malicious, but it can be used as a trading block. That happened to me in the OR, and I don't want to go into that story, but a patient who said, if I don't get this service, well, I'm just going to ask for MAID. So, and this is an unfortunate thing because it shouldn't be used in that way. So yes, there are definitely potential for abuse here.
I'm wondering, is there a risk, I'm assuming there is, of Christian doctors leaving practice early or maybe even not entering the medical field because of this? Like I, for one, probably like all of us, prefer a Christian doctor. Are they going to be harder to find in the years to come?
For
Yeah,
sure.
Go ahead, Isabel.
For sure. Like, I'm feeling a lot of pressure, and I'm at an age where I could easily leave. I don't want to abandon my patients, but and I remember when I saw the regulation from the college come through, I really, it brought me to tears, because I thought, if I was a young woman, I would never choose to go into family medicine. I would go into radiology. I would do something else, but I've got very short time practicing, but I can't imagine being a young family physician and being faced with this.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that young, dedicated Christians will probably opt out of primary care because of this, which is really a shame, because I think that's where something can make a real impact. And just like, and I don't know that this is for sure, but I hazard to guess that there's probably less Christians in obstetrics and gynecology now than there were 50 years ago, percentage-wise. Because there are places you can still practice without doing abortion, but not everywhere. And so I think it will eventually maneuver Christians away from certain specialties, and even for the practice of medicine, possibly. So that is unfortunate.
I think another thing is that with the pressure being so great, like I was almost crumbling. It was so horrible. That people will compromise, right? And so you're going to get a compromised Christian doctor who then is ethically compromised there. And so it's so much easier to ethically compromise and then sort of leave the faith, because you can't really face yourself, right? So moral disintegration, I think, could happen as well, right?
Is there a place in Canada that is doing this well? And then Brian, please, you can ask your question. Go ahead.
I've been intrigued by this conversation. A bit of a personal note, my daughter's in her third year of nursing, started her rotations in a local hospital here. And I, as a parent, have been leaning over her shoulder in her online ethics course, which has been an interesting conversation where this whole area has been brought up. And to see the educational angles that they're taking, somewhat void of any spiritual guidance or spiritual input, is actually quite alarming. So to be a Christian, in her case, will be in a primary care nursing situation. I'm seeing it firsthand as a parent, and that to me is alarming. And to see, I think Dr. Guglielmo said, to see a lack of maybe Christians taking on medical profession would be, I think, an unwanted cause here of this legislation. And I just want to say, Karen, I don't think you want to hire a hitman. I don't think that's. But I thought the illustration, Dr. Jane, was excellent. I think I'm going to repeat that a few places. But
me too. Yeah, it was very effective.
I don't think Karen's hiring any hitman. Just want to let everybody know that.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I think now would be a really great time to have our panelists answer the question, what are you hoping that we're going to do? What are you hoping Christians in Ontario, the people of Ontario, denominations, churches in Ontario will do? So why don't we start with our doctors? Let's start with Dr. Nunes, and we'll go forward from there.
It would be wonderful to see with the campaign that we hope to have, to see so many phone calls into MPPs for them to realize that this is an issue people care about. This is an issue they really seriously have to consider, and that from it, some legislation will come to our provincial parliament, and we can at least keep Christians in the profession, hopefully allow new ones to come in and practice well.
Wonderful. Dr. Dobson?
Yeah, I say the same thing. If Christians, all Christians, especially nurses, pharmacists, physicians, but everybody, we're all affected, right? If we could contact our MPPs and be persistent, because it's very hard to get them on the phone. And it's great to send a letter, but you know what? If you ask for a Zoom meeting, they know you're serious, right? And just say a 10-minute, 5-minute Zoom meeting, that's all I want, right? And then they see a face. It means difference, seeing a face, and then bring a story either from your family, your friend. You know, we all know now someone that's been involved in some way with a lethal injection of medical assistance in dying, and how devastating it is. So if we could be allowed to practice in good faith, and it'll help the nurses and the pharmacists as well. It'll be for all healthcare workers. Okay.
Dr. Gugliotta?
Yes, I agree. And I think that independent of the political action, which we're asking for, is also just the awareness and a renewed awareness that C7, with the dropping of reasonably foreseeable, actually changes the meaning of MAID. No longer is it just medical assistance in dying. It's now going to be medical acceleration in dying, because non-dying people will be given what they ask for, and that is an acceleration to their death. And so we need to wake up. We need to be alert. We need to do what we can. We need to pray and trust God for the answers.
David Goretzky?
I think my response would be simply to remind us that this is one instance of conscience protection that's needed. But if we lose this one, chances are there'll be ripple effects, and it'll just go further. You know, I was going to ask earlier about how far does this go? I had a letter, an email several months ago from an ambulance driver who didn't want to be involved in the transfer of a patient, but they had no choice because they weren't under the CPSO guidelines. But their employer said, you either do it or you're fired. So they were trying to figure out. So this is just the first in many. And I think if churches understood that this is not just an isolated profession, but this is going to likely ripple further. So there's a growing awareness that if you take conscience from one group, chances are it's also going to go elsewhere.
Well said. Mr. Worthen?
Well, I just wanted to say that I don't want the bottom line message to be that Christians have to get out of healthcare, because I think that would be an awful thing for the Christian community. We tend to be lovers more than fighters, but this is a case where we have to fight, I think, in order to be faithful to our call. And we have to say, hey, Jesus has a place in healthcare. Jesus identified with the vulnerable. So I think for us to just walk away from this whole field is a huge mistake and a betrayal of our calling. I think we have to fight, and we have to get everyone involved to help them understand the serious consequences of our inaction.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Julia Beasley.
Yeah, I wish we could keep this conversation going, because hearing from the doctors is so important and it's so compelling. I actually wanted Larry to jump in and speak a little bit to the pre-screening that's also happening. Brian was talking about his daughter who's already in nursing, but we're aware of instances of medical schools that are actually starting to pre-screen students based on their views on participating in medical assistance in dying. So as David said, right, the ripples just keep going outward and outward. But I think everybody has done a fantastic job of explaining the importance of engaging. We have an opportunity right now. And as we've heard, you know, there may be doctors. I think this C7 changes the playing field, so that there may be doctors who did not object to MAID under all circumstances. But when they are now faced with the prospect of having to participate in the death of a patient who is not dying, who lives with disability or chronic illness, and certainly if that sunset clause on the provision against mental health is passed, which would mean in 2 years, you know, just having chronic depression or another mental illness would be grounds for access to MAID. I think that, you know, there are going to be far more medical professionals who have objections to participating in any way. So, I mean, the hope is this will help in terms of,
sort of garnering support for conscious protection, because there will be so many more who are now impacted. But I think it's still, MPPs will still likely feel that it's politically risky to act decisively on this. And so that is why it is just so terribly important that they hear from Ontarians in significant numbers, in all kinds of different ways. As Dr. Jane said, face-to-face is the best. Have a phone call, ask for a Zoom meeting, express your concerns, let them know you think this is essential and important. And, if we have Ontario and Manitoba, if we get those two provinces with legislation, then that will put pressure on other provinces as well. So this is such a good time. It's such an important time to engage when we have this possibility before us. You've seen, the coalition has got some great resources that people can use. We have some on our website. If you go to www.theefc.ca/conscience, we've got, social media graphics that you can share. You can use that to encourage your communities and constituencies to participate. You can also share it on Facebook or Twitter and tag your MPP, tag the Premier, and just let them know, anything we can do to have that groundswell of support and encouragement to MPPs and to the Premier to take action on this, the better. So yeah, thank you for your time, and please engage.
So I get the last word, I guess, in this regard. So now that we've heard from the doctors, now that we've heard from the EFC, you've heard from CMDA, the call to action is to get out there and start contacting the Ontario government as soon as possible, and as great a number as possible, so that they have no doubt that Ontarians care deeply about not their charter right to conscience, but their God-given conscience. So we've developed a few really helpful resources to make it as easy as possible for members of the public to write and contact their MPs. So this is a little preview. We have a website, www.canadiansforconscience.ca/Ontario. This is a website specifically for Ontario. That website has a letter writing form, and that letter automatically is going to go to the Minister of Health, the Premier, and if you're in a Conservative riding right now, it'll go to your MPP as well. And once you've signed up in that way, we're going to be able to ask you to call your MPP and connect you directly. We have a really neat service we've paid for that it will literally create a patch-in calling, like on the the Carol Burnett show where she's got the little switchboard. It'll do that for you, and it's really fantastic. And so we can get Christians across Ontario, those of us who are less tech savvy, those of us who are more tech savvy, everybody can come together and contact their MPPs directly through this website. The letter on the page is a sample letter that you can completely edit. It automatically provides one of 100 different versions of this letter, just to help people make their voice heard. But if you have a personal story you want to share, if your congregation has individuals have stories they want to share, you can write those in. You can personalize it as much as you want. So that's the website. But besides the website, we also have a Google Drive that we've created. This Google Drive is for congregational leaders and for pastors. It's got all sorts of really great resources. We've got sample letters for you if you want to contact the public or the members of your church, or the pastors if you're a denominational leader. We've got a really excellent video that actually features 2 of the 3 doctors we have on here today talking about why conscience rights matter, how it impacts them, and what they want. So the conversation we had today, but in a 3-minute video. In addition, we have some social media resources, because Julia mentioned if you want to go on social media and tag your MPP, we've got lots of different options, and those are pre-designed for Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter in both English and in French. So there's a lot of really great resources, even prayers. If you want to have people pray at home and dedicate prayer and fasting to this, they can do that too. So the link to that is listed on the screen, and we can put it in the chat as well. So that's, now that we've told you we want you to help, we wanted to make sure you knew that we could resource you and prepare you. So I just want to thank all of our presenters for joining us today, all of our guests. It has been informative and a blessing to hear from you. It's been inspiring, I hope, for each of us. If you have any questions at all about the campaign, you are more than welcome to email me directly. My email should be in the chat, but it's communications@cmdacanada.org. And I'd be happy to help you launch a campaign in your church or in your denomination. So I thank all of you guys for coming. We've really appreciated spending this last hour with you, and I hope you have a really blessed day.